recording has started, so I'm going to go ahead
I
and...
feel like this is perfectly timed because you've just frozen. And now.
Yeah, wow, that was perfect. I don't actually think that's happened before.
Yeah.
Like that really.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So I'm
I
gonna
thought it was on purpose, so
no
just play it as.
no, it wasn't at all. That I was talking about how my internet might freeze, and then the moment I hit start recording, it froze. Anyway, we're back to not frozen. So I'll start this the way I always do, which is, who are you?
I am Brian Tyrrell. I run Dungeons on a Dime, which is a entry-level tabletop role-playing game publisher. I am based in Scotland, and as it says on my Twitter, I am gay and I am autistic, and I just make games and I have fun and I do stuff.
Not a bad summary, at all. um, so I've been aware of you. I want to say for at least I've been aware of your product for 9 months, a year.
Ooh,
Yeah,
that makes me feel special.
does it really? Um,
But every time someone hears about me, I'm always like, ooh.
well, fair enough. Yeah, I guess being known, you kind of you're on one side of that coin or the other. It's either the worst thing in the world or the best. But this is the first time we're speaking. We've
Yeah.
DM'd, but even that was only quite recently, and actually in regards to this. So this is going to be an interesting one for me because I'm coming at you familiar with your product and really not at all with you as an individual. So that's where my focus is probably going to be. But before we go straight into that aspect, you make cool shit. Um, you do. I've always been, a fan. I think I'm glad to see it carried. I'm glad that Jared carries it at Spear Witch. I like seeing it around. Tell tell me more. Where'd you start?
So Dungeons on a Dime started with like three separate needs that I needed to get met all at once. I'd graduated, I did illustration at uni. I did a Bachelor of Arts in illustration. And like all artists, I was starving and I had no work. So I needed an excuse to make work. Originally, it was to build a portfolio of stuff that looked like it was real so that people would hire me. But then the longer I did it, the better I got. And also, people just weren't hiring me anyway. And then I just kept doing Dungeon of Dime until it became a full-time thing. So I feel like that's the way with a lot of artists who self-start projects is they start by trying to get into capitalism and then it bounces them away and then they go, oh, well, I guess this is better anyway.
And then you become the
So,
capitalism.
yeah, to some degree, yeah. So I needed work for my portfolio. All of my friends needed work for my portfolio. I wanted to write role-playing games because I've been playing them since I was a kid. And I wanted to be able to give myself and my friends work that made that like unique collaborative atmosphere where we could make work and be critical to it and then make it better for everyone, but also come out the end with stuff that we liked, that we wanted to share.
An artist collective.
Yeah, to a degree. I had seen a lot of artist collectives where it got very messy, where it was the same artist working over and over and over again.
Sure.
And I wanted Dungeons on a Dime to be a stepping stone. People could come in, do a project, get that reference they needed for the job, and then move on and do whatever they wanted to do. They didn't have to have an investment in it. Whereas I'd seen there are some great collectives in London, but we had a lot of collectives come in and lecture at my uni, and they had a lot of drama, oh, this person kept drinking milk, and then they would leave it on the side and it would go moldy in the studio. And we had all these puppets, and they went moldy because of the milk. And it's like, okay.
Okay, so I guess it's more the vibe you get from something like a working studio, where people drop in, rent some space, do the work they need to do, move on to the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool.
And also with the hope that I could pay them, not just that they do work for free, but that I'd be I give them money. That's the goal. So that was the behind the scenes motivation to why I started Dungeons on a Dime. But there was also a product motivation as well. Around the time I started thinking of this sort of stuff about 5 years ago, there was a lot of, and there still is, but there was a lot of indie creators on Patreon making regular monthly content like maps, miniatures, adventures, settings, primers, but they were all separate. It
Mm-hmm.
was, you went to this Patreon and there would be 100 minis a month, and there would be all these different creatures. You can vote on whether it was going to be skull wolves or dagger kobolds or whatever,
Sure.
and they're really cool. But if you are new to role-playing games, like many of my friends are, or if you are struggling to assemble things on a budget, it's difficult to find and subscribe to these Patreons. There's also a double whammy where these Patreons have a sort of like survival of the fittest. The best
100%.
ones
Yeah.
make loads of content, and then because they have lots of content, they can offer it for free, which then gets more people to subscribe,
Yep.
and then it makes a lot of creating for people who want to start out very difficult. So linking into that sort of collective art studio mentality, I wanted to provide a service that assembled just what you needed for an adventure, sort of like a package box, but on a dime. So it was cheap, it was just what you needed. It was print out miniatures at home, it was digital files, it was quick writing, very fun layout, and that's where it started. And with that ethos in mind of developing artists, creating content that's accessible and that isn't super pricey, that develops both the reader in terms of a role-playing game person, their skills playing role-playing games, but also the artists who work on it and the creatives who work on it in their ability to make content. It's changed form, but it's mostly stayed that route.
So it might be a harder question to answer than just where and how, but to have an eye on that kind of, let's call it accessibility, right? I think that word often has too many meanings and gets too loaded, but in a very pure sense, you're talking about access to material and access to hobby, right? Being able to even break in the first place and then have everything there. At least in my experience, people who find themselves dedicated to that, who are driven in some way by it, there's a reason. People who have come about everything in their life, and specifically in the area that they're pushing this out into the world easily, tend not to care as much because it has always been accessible. Where do you come to that interest from?
So I have thought about this a lot in the past, which is why I have an easy answer. I know that this question might be like, everyone has to find their own connection to why they make art and why they make the things they do. And when you do, it feels like there's a light bulb, but it can be struggle for other people. So I'm not saying it's an easy question to answer, but I've thought about it a lot. And I think it roots in my autism and my queerness, which is why I'm very proud to put them out in my bios and talk about it, and also make what I like to think are queer and disabled-focused games. Autism, for those who don't know, is a social disability. It means that you find some aspects of social interactions difficult, and there isn't a lot of easiness to pick up social norms, rules, things that people do when they talk. I mean, in England, it's kind of a common joke. If someone asks you how you are, you respond, "Yeah, I'm fine, and how are you?" You never tell people how you actually are. It's just a greeting. It's their words. They don't mean anything.
Same thing in New
But
York.
an autistic person, yeah, in an autistic person in that situation would go, "Oh yeah, well actually I've been really sad and my cat's been feeling ill and I don't have a car to get to the vet and blah, 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 blah." And you unload all this emotional baggage. People go, "Oh, what the hell?" So I grew up autistic, and I found that role-playing games from a very young age were a sort of safe arena to practice these sort of social dynamics, these skills that in real life I was messing up and I was getting bullied for, and I wasn't understanding why people were reacting badly to me for it. I got to practice those skills in role-playing games and then take the real tangible benefits, learn from the mistakes that my characters made, and take the tangible benefits of those lessons into real life and become a more social and apt person. I feel like a lot of my ability to structure my thoughts and communicate my emotions, set boundaries, all of that comes from role-playing games. So having seen how useful they've been for me in the past in learning these sorts of skills and how to have conversations, I then want to spread them to as many people as possible because I think they're fun and I think they're engaging and I know that they work on a personal level. I mean, I've also done research into it as well, play therapy and the ability to use games, any kind of game really, but I think especially role-playing games, is proven again and again over decades, from 1980s through to today, to work in helping people socialize and learn, in different ways. There's the literal game theory of like, oh, you do a thing and it's fun and you remember it. But there's the slight distancing with the game where it's not super intense. If you fail, it's your character that failed. It's not you that failed. It allows you to be more objective and learn and move forward and have a positive experience, as opposed to getting burdened by feeling like, oh God, I can't do this.
I mean, so one, I think we both understand that you're preaching to the choir in this regard. But I will say that was a very clean summary. I'm also
I'd also
now.
add,
No, please go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, I'd also add that's the autism side of things, but I came into the conversation about my queerness quite late. I know that there are some people in my generation, because I'm 25, going on 26. I've been out since I was 15, but I don't think I've been like queer until I was maybe like 22, 23. Mostly because I didn't know how to interact and engage in these spaces and to talk about these sorts of things. I know that age and vulnerability is a big issue with gay male spaces, gay men love men spaces. And I won't speak for other spaces, but it can be difficult where you have lots of different age groups, a lot of different expectations that you know what you're doing. When you're autistic, you learn how to mimic, but you don't necessarily internalize why things work. So like I can be like, yes, queen, come on, honey. But I don't understand the signals that I'm sending. I just know that when I do that, people like me. So it took me a while to really understand and digest what it meant to be gay, what it meant to be queer. And again, a lot of that came down to reading role-playing games, playing role-playing games, taking the skills that I had cultivated there and realizing I can apply them elsewhere. And now I like to write games with actively queer characters so that passively it's normalizing being queer, because it is normal, but not a lot of people do think that. But also actively challenging experiences and problems that I found being queer and I want to discuss. So I like that it's a tool for all sorts of different things.
Yeah. I mean, again, fully agreed. The primary thought that's just going in the back of my head is like, God, fuck, why didn't I do this one earlier? This would have been, could have been like done this interview a year ago and then spent the past year just chatting about this shit. That would have been great.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's keep going.
Yeah, no, fair enough. We're 12 minutes into what might end up being a pretty long one. Okay, so textually versus subtextually, right? Building these things into the works you're doing. And so I think at this stage we'll step back to product, right? Like what was the original form, right? You have this beginner set, if you will, this collected box of what you need to run the session top to bottom. That to me implies, somewhat trad, probably trad fantasy. You have over time moved away from that. And kind of take me through the arc of your corpus, right? Like walk me through the development of the work you actually produce and how it is entangled with the kind of metatextual stuff that you're trying to encourage in the play and the world.
So I think in the same way that I engaged with my queerness later on, then like I came out, but then felt more queer and understood that later on in my life. I understood role-playing games and how they work later on in having played them. The origins of Dungeons and a Dime, like many role players, starts with 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. I made these kits, the original kits, to be compatible with Dungeons and Dragons. I had played AD&D, so I think it's 2nd edition, or it's in between 2nd edition.
I mean, if it's AD&D, it would be 2nd edition, likely, yeah.
Yeah, so I played AD&D growing up from like 10.
You're not
I played
old
that maybe
for it to be otherwise, yeah. You're 25 going
yeah.
on 26, right? Like, so
Yeah.
was this
Well,
like a relative or an older sibling or something?
So it was my parent, my whole family nerds. My mum and dad took us every summer, as opposed to going on holiday. We'd go and reenact as tutors for 2 weeks in the summer on a massive manor full of other people reenacting as tutors. And of course, those people are also nerds, and of course, they have kids.
Yes.
And so, of course, those kids are in a D&D group with one of the parents as the GM, and so that's why I was playing
Yeah,
second edition.
Second edition AD&D makes perfect sense then. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I've got a lot of experience almost firsthand with an older generation style of role playing, because that's what I grew up with. But they're an adult, and so it was more guided. But it's a similar experience to what a lot of people who are maybe like 40 have of like playing those games when they very first came out.
And I'll say
so I started with that.
That's reflected in your work, right? Like that's one of the few consistent things that I'll say of the Dungeons and Dragons products that I've looked at is it doesn't feel like the kind of stuff that comes out of Dungeon Masters Guild, right? There is the starts with 5e, but very clearly has only ever played 5e and listened to APs, railroady style. And then there is the works in 5e, but has broader and usually older exposure to older styles of roleplay. And you can feel the distinction, and you were very much in the latter camp, even in your earliest works.
So speaking of earliest works, as a side note, I remember I was like a year into making Dungeons on a Dime, and I was at my mum's house and going through some old stuff of mine, and I picked up First Quest, which is like the AD&D. I don't know if it's off-brand, but it's the introduction to AD&D. It's the starter kit for AD&D. And I was flipping through the books, and it was like the blue and black text illustrations that are very classic AD&D layout.
Yep.
And oh my God, I don't know how much I didn't know how much it influenced me, because I was like, oh, layout for layout, I am taking every single one of these cues. So I've developed since then, but very much in my heart, there is a seed of second edition in AD&D.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I played AD&D. I got older, then 5th edition came out. I learned that, and I used that to introduce a lot of my friends. Throughout the entirety of my childhood, I've made friends by playing D&D or running D&D for them, because everyone I have met ever has gone, oh, Dungeons and Dragons, that's that game where you do like orcs and magic and stuff. Oh, I really want to play, but I don't know anyone who plays. Even people who I didn't necessarily, that I was educated culturally to say, oh, jocks don't like games. Everyone wants to play D&D. And I think there's a lot of like negative tropes that don't exist actually in real life, that I thought were real and that I had internalized, but then weren't.
I will say, I think there's
nice
a generational shift. And I'm 31 going on 32, so there's 5-6 years between us. In that span of time, I've observed it change. It's very interesting. I think we finally hit the saturation point on nerdy shit being acceptable enough to admit, where even my generational cohort, I get pushback. It's certainly not as bad as the generational cohort above me, though. So who knows what
I am excited for like this generation and the generation below me and future generations, how they're going to be questioning not just like nerdy shit and interests, but also gender. I'm seeing that a lot with spaces where people are very much more comfortable with exploring who they are and what they want, and not having necessarily like strict labels. And that is so fun. I can't wait to see that happen. It's so cool. Yeah. So went on 5th edition. I introduced all my friends. That was another inspiration for Dungeons on a Dime. I wanted something that people could pick up that would actually introduce them, because I tried the starter sets for 5th edition and they were trash. I mean, Minds of Phandelver is a mess. It is a terrible campaign. Yeah. It's boring. It's a straight line, and then it becomes a box, and then it goes back to a straight line, and there is no advice on how to navigate any of that. And I know they rewrote it and then rewrote it again, and they made a new one, but I don't care. There's still a whole generation of players who didn't have a good starter set for what is now a world-renowned game. So yeah, I wanted to make starter sets that were better. So I started making, essentially, not that I was thinking or calling it that, but starter sets that were isolated from each other. So that's in the red, The Longest Night, Green Heart, and Blood in the Water. They're 4 essentially starter sets. They've got maps, they've got minis, they've got characters. They explain, they they teach through through showing, not telling, which is something that I tried really hard to kind of curate. But they go through all of the things that I feel you need to run an adventure, like characters, their motivations, what they want to do, what they've got, how they might react to different situations, well, not specific situations, but how do they like to react, or
Sure.
what do they think of these people? All of the things, the building blocks that I think you need for an adventure. And I wanted to lay it out in a way that also meant that people could look at it as a template and go, right, I need to do, if I want my own character, I need to do this, 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 and this, and then I've got that and I can do my own adventure. So I did 4 of those through Patreon, and initially I wanted to do an adventure a month. That was way too ambitious, and every book got bigger and bigger. I think the first draft of In the Red was 10,000 words. The second draft was 25,000 words, and then the published one with BHP, like a year and a bit later, was like something close to that amount, but totally rewritten.
Sure.
And I think like The Longest Night, Greenheart, and Blood in the Water were all around that same size as well, which for something that you were buying for like £10 is, for all of the content with it as well, is, I think, pretty well priced. Not bad.
Yeah.
So I did that, and it was around that time, around Blood in the Water and Greenheart, that I was engaging more with with different forms of conversation around role-playing games. So I was solidly just 5th edition, it's the best, I love Critical Role, yay. And then I got off Reddit. That was the first big step. And I got onto Instagram, and I met a lot of, I think like the very first person I followed was, oh God, they've got like a really cool, I know the person who did their logo because we're in a Discord now. Schaefer did their logo, that like the indie RPG podcast or something like that. But no, it's I'll find the name later.
Vintage
Basically,
RPG
they're a
podcast?
Vintage RPG.
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, so they cover a lot of old D&D stuff, which is why I started following them. But they also do indie role-playing games from now and then. They've even reviewed my stuff, which is nice. But they were the first person I followed, and the idea of like, there are other games that aren't D&D out there, and I should go try them. And then I like the idea of, well, I don't want to restrict people to doing D&D. They might want to try Pathfinder. That's very different to D&D. And so I started doing more system neutral with like monster stat blocks at the end for Blood in the Water and Greenheart. And then after Greenheart, I had a big soul search and was like, system neutral is the way to go. And then I started writing my own games because I was like, I think there are like, D&D is like 1 million books. I should just do a smaller game. I liked like Honey Heist and other small single one-shot systems, but I wanted to make something that was a little bit more substantial, but not like more than 5 pages. And I wrote around and I started making games. Yeah, a 2-shot, like a 5-shot, something that had development in it, but also people could pick up, play a couple times and go, I don't like role-playing. It's not for me. Or, I like this. I'm going to go look at that big 30-pound box set or something. It wouldn't be £30, it'd be 90, but yeah.
Probably at this point, if not more.
So then I moved, that was the end of like 2018, and then 2019, 2020. Well, 2019, I was working solidly on like indie stuff, my own games, my own adventures.
So
and then
this is when I'm first aware of you and going back to your backlog and seeing your more trad fantasy stuff and seeing your current stuff. So this is my origin point with being aware of you here. Then, map out the next couple of years. What's been most recent?
So I was going to conventions and I was selling a fair amount of product. It was really nice to see. I would sell maybe 200 books at a convention, which is not something I'd ever done before.
That's good sales.
And yeah, people wanted to buy my stuff. I was like, oh my God, why? So I was going and going, and then a little thing called the pandemic happened. I don't know if you heard about it. It's the same line as everyone has said. Things slowed a little bit, and I decided to essentially burn all my savings and just keep making stuff throughout the pandemic, with the hope that when things open back up, I will have a whole host of stock. And the last year, I have been working on more indie stuff than I have ever done before. It has been so exciting. And genuinely, I'm making some of the best work I've ever made. Like, it's so weird. I came out of my illustration degree, like, I like art and I like making design, but I can't draw. I'm terrible at it. And now I've drawn maybe half the art for like this latest game that I'm working on. and I'm actually happy with it. I'm not ashamed. I'll be like, oh, I like this.
You're not like hiding it as
Yeah.
like a tiny spotilo scaled all the way
Mhm.
down behind somebody else's art.
Exactly. Like that was what I did a lot of the time with the first four games or like packs I made, was that like I do like long column illustrations or like objects like backpacks with stuff in, because it's like, oh, I can do that. Anyone can do that. It's just reference items. And they would always be like, oh, I've got this much money to pay for gorgeous spot arts, and now here's all the wonky shapes that I can't pay anyone for, so I'm just going to do it myself. But now I'm like, oh, I'm doing an actual spread and I'm liking it and it's looking cool. Yeah.
Okay, so we haven't actually dove brain not working. Dovenid, who knows?
Yeah.
We haven't gone into what the indie work you're producing actually is, right? We've talked about the Dungeons on a Dime core product, but what is some of that indie work? And again, going back, I think to, at least for me, the most interesting topic: how does it interface with that desire to increase accessibility for new players and experienced players?
So I think like the main thing people probably know me for is a system I wrote called Adventures on a Dime. It's free and it's available through Roll20 as well. They've got a character sheet, and they helped pay for first of all, it's one of the free games they have on there. They don't have many free systems you can actually just download, but it's like a splash sheet. It's got all the information is in like little content packs, and obviously there's like a working character sheet. It's essentially a simple role-playing game that is like a 2 or 3 shot. It's designed for characters that can develop from game to game, but you don't have to play a long series of games to get a fun resolution out of it.
Sure.
It's also useful for one-shots as well. It's perfectly fine. And it is, I made that to accompany In the Red for its like official publication. It wasn't just a staple-bound rhizozine, but it was now a perfect-bound book available in stores around the world. Yeah. So I made that to go in the back of In the Red because I wanted the book to be system neutral entirely, and then I wanted to also accompany some kind of game with it so that it was an all-in-one pack. I didn't want to say, buy this and then also buy something else or go download a thing. I wanted someone to pick up the book and give it to someone, and there you go.
Kind of a logical furtherance of the core goal of the original project, right? Have the entire thing that you need in this singular item.
Exactly. So I'm actually working on a second edition of it right now with my editor, Vi Huntsman, who is fantastic.
Vi is amazing. Yeah.
Vi is great. I love Vi. Just, it's like a fairy. They just sort of like, and then everything's fixed. So yes, that's the core thing that I think a lot of people know me for, because it's free, you can play it, it makes characters, and I jokingly think of it as CV Builder the game, because it's job-based. Character creation is you pick your stats, you don't roll them, you pick them. Your stats come with a descriptor of your character, so 3 stats are cunning, vigor, and willpower. Each one can be used to resolve any kind of check. There's no like exclusive, this is a willpower check or this is a vigor check. It's how you describe what your character does defines which stat they use. And then each, the stats are various size of die from D4 up to D12. D12 being better, D4 being worse. If you roll 4 or better, you succeed. That's the system, with a little extra sprinkled on. So if you have a higher die size, it gives you a better characteristic. So you could be cowardly if you were a D4, or you could be enticing or entrancing if you're a D12.
Have you played Mazes or anything in the polymorph system? By ninth level
No,
games?
I've not.
You should check it out. It's similar. It's that concept, but again, kind of trad fantasy for their core offering. But they've expanded it to other things since. But it's just Mazes, all caps.
I'm going to scribble that down.
But yeah, each of the classes that you can pick from are designed around which of their stats has the highest die size.
So in Adventures on a Dime, you've got your stats and then you have your jobs. It's the core purpose of Adventures on a Dime is to introduce a lot of the concepts that other role-playing games use. So like Dungeons on a Dime products itself, it's a stepping stone to more complicated systems if you want it to be. So your jobs have 3 skills, a trait, and a flaw. players can tag a skill during a check and say, oh, my character knows how to tie butterfly knots, so it's going to be perfect for making this bow lines work or something like that, or shit. You get advantage on your roll. DMs can tag a character's trait or flaw to give advantage or disadvantage in the situation.
Sure.
So everyone's got something that they can do that's a little bit more engaged.
Are the tags freeform, like fate? Or okay, they're not drawn from a list that
you make them up.
Interesting, cool.
So there are some examples. There's like, oh, the pirate might have these stats, but there's no prescripted list.
It's nice. It's an interesting mix of different kind of indie and trad fantasy mechanics and tropes.
So Adventure on a Dime, though it has a lot of fantasy artwork in there, isn't actually a fantasy game. It's a system or setting neutral game. So you could run a space game in it because your job could be mechanical engineer, and your skills might be realigning the goop and twisting bolts and yelling, work, damn it, and those could be your skills.
Realigning the goop is definitely going to be innuendo in my vocabulary from now on.
Yeah. So it's a very simple system, and character advancement is just you get more jobs and you learn more skills. Well, you learn skills and then cement them into jobs and get traits and flaws out of them.
Sure.
It's a lot of it is based, or like the heart of Adventures of Dime is kind of drawn out of my 7 years in retail before I went full time to working on role playing stuff. Which is why all jobs give you a trait and a flaw, because you always take baggage with you from your last job, and it's always with you. Yeah.
I like it. Okay. So that's that's that one. All right, then what came next?
So that was with In the Red, and then I was fulfilling In the Red. COVID happened. It was a bunch of drama. That's from 2019 to 2020, so it extended me working on that. And I had been, while working on In the Red, I had been also working on Vice and Virtue, which is my first non-game system, and it's not necessarily an adventure. So I have it handily here. It's this sort of like fun book. It's A5, and the idea behind it is that it introduces like morality into role-playing games, discussions around morality, character motivation, and that sort of thing, without being really edgelordy about it. I found that I found the most fun I had in role-playing games was when, not necessarily like, oh, we roll over and we stab a dragon, or oh, we climb a hill and we get the thing, but when actually my players were talking to each other afterwards about like, oh god, how did you choose between A and B to do the thing, and and don't you feel like, isn't that going to keep you up at night? And people going, oh god. And I love that. It's drama. We all love it. So I wanted to make something that could help people do that. Originally it was just again a couple pages, and then I got a bit too enthusiastic and it grew into like 100-page book. But the core of it is that it's a set of tools that give the players the ability in the game to choose a direction they want to act in, if they want to act in the moment, or if they want to be more cold and reserved and considerate of all the factors. It gives them a little bit of sway to push the story in that direction, which you can decide system by system. But the example that I give in the book is for people who are in the moment, they can just choose to automatically succeed on a check. And for people who are more objective, they can choose for someone else at the table to succeed in a check.
So
that you have a...
Okay, so here's a kind of a, not a breaking point. A question. A common discussion topic, and I'll say intergenerationally, probably a point of contention within the industry, is the importance, the value of mechanizing aspects of play to specifically encourage behaviors, which I think dovetails very nicely with the educational bent, dovetails very nicely with the, in a sense, the accessibility, right? To make something more accessible for an individual often requires frameworks, whatever it is. Um, but you're also coming originally out of, your first experience is this second edition AD&D. It's something with a lot of mechanics, but that we often kind of just don't pay attention to, right? Most people didn't play AD&D using all the rules, or they made up a lot of their own rules. And I think there's kind of a natural tension there between the mechanization of a thing and the kind of inherent freeform nature of a role-playing game. Now, this could be me talking for a long time and you going, no, that's not an issue for me, but like, has has that been something that's cropped up in your design process, in the reception of your work, right? Because
Definitely.
yeah, like with Vice and Virtue, this is fundamentally adding. It's a good looking book. It is something that I think is really useful, right? And it does hit on one of the core things that makes role playing games really awesome, right? If I'm in it to whack some dragons with a sword, I'm gonna play video games. They've done more to get that feel right, to make that a addictive, engaging loop. Then like I love rolling dice, but it's not going to match it. Role playing games in analog form give me that moral dilemma. They give me that freeform questioning, and so you're I think you hit on something really interesting with it, which is building systems around that to encourage that style of play. But yeah, even in your introduction, you have the crunchy version and the less crunchy version. What kind of shape does that take in your head as you're going through the design process?
So I think I always thinking side thing. I
Sure.
always think of it as disc horse because I saw someone use the disc and like the horse and the disc emoji,
Mm-hmm. That
and
was
now I'm like disc horse.
Fiona Mavegeist, OG.
Yes.
That's where that started. She started that.
So I think a lot of discourse in all forms of community likes to talk about uh, sort of like a utopian goal that we all want to be at, but can then can turn on itself and then criticize things that don't meet the utopian goal, even if they're bridging towards it. And I like to think that role playing games. Well, first of all, society would get to a point where we could have free-form role-playing games, and it would all just be storytelling around fires, and yeah, that'd be lovely. That's a utopia that I want to be
Sure.
in. But I know that that's not the reality for a lot of people, and a lot of people start in different places. So when I make a product, I like to think about how different kinds of people will be using it, what experiences it will be helping curate, and who it's going to be helping, and trying to maximize all the different areas so that it is both flexible and of value to a lot of people, but also still helping and not kind of being like this sort of like, oh, look how great I am, virtue signal flag, but not actually doing
Sure.
the thing that I wanted to do. So when I was thinking of Vice and Virtue, I was thinking of my crunchy fifth edition roots. And I think when we talk about structures that help support experiences and play, agency and permission are the two big flashing words that come up in my mind. When we have a rule for something, it gives us permission to do it. And when you've been playing in a crunchy system or you've not encountered that kind of play before, having a little gentle rule that says, hey, here's permission for you to do a thing. In Vice and Virtue, it's, hey, you want to be the kind of in there doing the thing, acting cool, not thinking about others. Here's a little ticket that you can raise and say, "Hi, I want to be that." Giving players the permission to tell those stories and be more engaged in the stories they tell, as opposed to it being, "I want to do a thing," and the GM saying, "Roll or no." Helping balance that dynamic is important. It might not necessarily be a system that is going to be used or be useful in a later stage or a more like
Sure.
erudite form of roleplay where everyone already stands these dynamics and they don't need to use safety tools and lines of veils and palettes and all these things because we're brains floating in jars 5,000 years in the future. But until we get to that point, and I won't want to get there, but until we get there, it's good to have simple things that give permission and introduce these concepts. So
I like
yeah,
that.
I have thought about that a lot.
I like that. I like that framework of permission, right? That's it's much cleaner, and I think it gets to the heart of, at least in my head, of what being a good educator is about, right? It's not about dictums. It's not about the correct way to do a thing and versus the wrong way to do a thing. It's, if anything, it is, about here is the large slate of permissive behaviors. Pick the ones that work best for you and navigate within them. Expanding
I
that
think
permissions. Yeah.
I think a good concrete example of permissions happening is every single time there is some kind of unearthed arcana that comes out for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, there is immediate hype from lots of people who go, "Oh my god, I can play a warlock who has a celestial patron. It's canon. This is amazing." And you could always do that.
Yeah,
There
to
was
all
nothing
to the
stopping you
rest of
before.
us,
In
as
the
you,
core rules, yeah. But I mean, like, even in the core rules, it says you can make up your own thing. But there is an inherent, this is a kind of a thread that comes from zine culture. I work at a zine library. The ability to put something on paper and hold it up, I feel like a lot of like Western culture really puts a lot of purpose and
yeah,
power in the written thing, which is why everyone loves a physical edition. They love holding a thing, or it's in a book, it's a thing. When you glitch brain.
no, please, it's
Yeah, when you write a rule down, when Unearthed Arcana releases something new, it gives people permission, and it gives them permission that is not them saying, "I'm making it up and I'm asserting my right as the storyteller to do this thing." Someone else said I could do it. It's
yeah.
fine. Mom said I could play. Mom said I could have a cookie. Like, it gives you the permission,
I mean,
and it takes the pressure off of trying this new thing.
on the one hand, I find that deeply fundamentally troublesome about the nature of humanity, because it's absolutely a sign of the degree to which followership is endemic, even in our leisure, let alone our labors. But also,
I
yeah,
want to challenge that. I want to challenge that
go ahead.
and say I think it is not necessarily followership. I think it is a lot of times wanting to avoid confrontation and a misunderstanding of relationships, not having those boundaries placed. I think there is a lot of bad social skills being taught through role playing games. I know that I picked up some bad tropes. I'm not saying they're a good vector to teach the skills, but the skills they teach sometimes, if you're with the wrong people, if you have a bad, game master, just like hanging out with people who aren't good for you, or you don't set your relationships and boundaries with, you can pick up bad,
Yeah,
things.
no, important distinction.
Behaviors. That's the word. Yeah. So I feel like I see it more like the dog that has been taught not to go in the garden, and then someone opens the door and says, the door's open, and the dog doesn't want to go in the garden. But when the person comes on and says, "Oh, do you want to go in the garden?" and goes, "Yeah, I totally want to go in the garden," because they don't want to disappoint anyone. They don't want to upset
So I mean,
other people at the table. Yeah.
My psychology brain is saying aversion to conflict and followership often are very strongly positively correlated. But I think you're probably correct that it is, for most people, more consciously an aversion to conflict. Right? It is. If anything, I'm in imaginative space to escape from something else. I don't want to bring that drama and that heat into my imaginative space. Or you're on the complete opposite end of the coin and you're unbelievably argumentative. But yeah.
Well, I was literally thinking that. I was like, and then there are people who want to have like a, yeah. Who look at this, it's those articles that like 10 ways to fuck over your DM, as if that's the goal you should want.
Yeah, no, it's the this is how rules lawyers exist, right? Like, by having a body of law that we add to. But at the same time, I think you're at core, you're correct, right? Adding to it in the short term is fundamentally a net positive, because giving people permission is probably, if not the best, among the best stepping stones toward. I really like that you called it erudite form of roleplay. I'm probably going to absorb that. Yeah, it's a very good way to kind of expand the possibility space until eventually they have that realization, that light bulb moment on their own of, oh, actually the possibility space is infinite and I don't need permissions anymore.
or it's sort of like I feel like it all connects through my own growth as a person, my coming into being autistic, my being proud of being autistic rather than being ashamed of it, which is something I had for a long. I mean, I didn't like telling people until I was like 23, 24. I had a harder time disclosing my diagnosis than I did coming out.
Mm-hmm.
And also, coming into queerness, I feel I don't need permission to be who I am anymore, which I feel comes across in a lot of the stuff I write and produce now.
Mm-hmm.
And equally, it takes time people to have that own realization of, I want to just tell a story, and that can be really fun. I don't need to wait for someone to tell me that I can tell that story.
All right, so this is part 2. We had a technical interruption. The summary of Vice and Virtue is go watch the Kickstarter video, and there you go. There, if you're interested in more, go watch the Kickstarter video and pick it up.
It's animated.
Damn! Wow, fancy. All right, shit. Then actually go do that. All right, so we were on permissions. We had jumped into Vice and Virtue, but you have more recent work that you're currently on right now that I think, in a sense, expands the general driving ethos, right, of accessibility and all the things that we've covered, all the reasons you've stated behind your corpus so far, and broadens that to a non-hobbyist populace. Yeah, tell more, please.
So I've mentioned it a little bit here and there, little crumb drops, because it's been something I've been working on since the beginning of the pandemic. But it's slow; it takes time. It's a project called Carved in Stone. So I was approached. It's really funny. I applied for a job to be like a graphic designer / editor with this charity, and they denied me. But then the lead of like one of their big ups came over and was like, "Oh, by the way, I actually love everything you do. Do you want to do a project together?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, sure." So I'm partnered with the Society of Antiquarians, who are I think it's antiquarians. I get this wrong. I think it's the Society of Antiquarians, but I call it the Society of Antiquities. And then they were like, no, we're the other thing. And now my brain gets the two confused because dyslexia. So I'm with the Society of Antiquarians Scotland, I think. They're antiquarians because they deal with antiquities. Anyway, they handle a lot of education about Scotland's history and past. They are a charity that do that. They have fellows all around the world. They're really cool. And they also help contribute to projects that deal with history, sites and museums, research, all sorts around Scotland. They're really cool, and they are archaeologists. They approached me because they want to find new ways of getting the information of Scotland's past into people's hands, and not just in a way of like, oh, Scotland, ain't it cool, but to get people actively talking about history, how it's relevant to our society today, and also clear up a lot of misconceptions that are coming through with Scottish history. Scotland is a large focus, or one of the large focuses in a lot of channels of misinformation, in the same way that people like to focus on Norway and Scandinavia and a lot of white Viking history for not good reasons. And actually, Scotland and many other countries, in fact, most countries in ancient society, were very multicultural, multilingual, and full of trade and settling and all sorts of different kinds of cultures. So they wanted a way of exploring that. And the guy I'm working with, who's really cool, Jeff Sanders, he loves role-playing games as much as I do. And he was seeing how effective role-playing games are in all these different channels of teaching social skills, of helping people discuss social inequality and these other like contemporary issues, and was like, can we take that to role-playing games? And so we've been working on Carved in Stone since the beginning of the pandemic, slowly chipping away at what a resource would look like, how that would work. And we ultimately have a project in mind, and we're working on the proof of concept with a pool of funding internally from the charity that should be debuting sometime in August, hopefully.
Okay. You told me more off cam, and I'm gauging, like, can I prod you for that info?
Yeah, prod me. Go for it.
Okay, cool.
I lose the thread easily.
No. So say what it is physically, right? Let's call it the end
Yeah.
deliverable, because I think that's very
Yeah,
interesting
yeah.
as a product class, if you will.
I always get distracted by like, you need to know all of the context, and then you don't actually need to know the
No.
context, which is not a thing.
In this instance, I actually think it's really interesting what like the end kit is going to
Yeah.
look like.
So the end kit is going to be a setting guide for 7th century Scotland Pictish society. The proof of concept is going to be a slice of what that whole kit would be. Ideally, it would be maybe like 100, 200 page book that just is essentially like a world guide that you would find for a fantasy land, but just for 7th century Pictish Scotland, full of resources that help you both tell stories in Scotland and also be a character in Scotland, understand the beliefs of the very peoples that lived there, the cultures that happened at that time, and to back all of this up with contemporary research from archaeologists at Scottish universities, showing that we have all of this research that disproves these misconceptions, this idea of like only men were women, only men were warriors, only women worked in houses, when actually we have grave sites that show proof of either of those. Exploring ideas and concepts of what they would have considered gender, sexuality, disability, how these things factor into society, and how a lot of white old male historians have tarred and flavored history when really it was much more diverse. We see it time and time again with actual archaeology and history, where people with different perspectives come in just casually, not even trained historians, take one look at something and go, oh, this is how it's worked. There are countless artifacts that people are like, oh, it's some sort of strange religious relic. And then someone comes in and goes, oh, no, you use that for making lace. And that's it. Nothing special. And it's metal because you have to use all the prongs all the time and a wood thing would fall apart. We find you do DNA testing on ancient bones and you find that what you first thought was a man's skeleton is actually a woman's skeleton because they're pretty much the same. There's no way of telling them apart just by looking at them. And how that affects interpretations of like grave sites and the things that we find. I mean, a trope we've all seen is, and they were best friends, where there are all these queer relationships, or at least not heterosexual, stereotypical relationships happening, and they are being completely just ignored any kind of divergent characteristics because it can't be proven that they were gay, even though all the signs are there.
Yeah. And the end audience for this is not like fellow academics. It's not even adults, right? Like this is...
Well, it's everybody. Okay. It has aspects that pull into all these different places. The intention is that anyone can pick up this book and flick through it and engage with it in some way that is going to be exciting. It's going to be very visual with text. It's not just going to be like a typical setting guide where it's like pages and pages and pages of text.
Yeah.
We're at the ground level incorporating lots of imagery, lots of short sentences and diagrams, with the idea being that kids can pick this up. Well, one of our other partners, Glasgow Life, serve around 200 primary schools, so that's up to 11 education, and then a lot more secondary schools, and that's up to 16 education in the UK, in the Glasgow area. And they have lots of role-playing groups, like school clubs, where kids are learning to play D&D because it's fun. And they want to get a project like this into the hands of those schools because then kids can learn about actual Scottish history and explore that and all the fun of role-playing games, rather than like, there's a dragon, let's stab it. Which for them, they're like, education, tick, 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 tick. So we want this to be an educational product in that anyone can pick it up, read it, get a feel for 7th century Pictish society, and then play games with it. Even if you don't want to play games with it, we want it to be something that you could flick through and go, this is really cool. This is neat. Oh, wow. Maybe I could write a story about this, or maybe I could get more context on my favorite TV show. Or you could start writing your own games. Having never played a game before, you might pick it up and go, I just want to learn some stuff. And then go, well, actually, why don't me and my friends get together and be Picts for a while?
It's fascinating, right? It is simultaneously a logical, for me at least, continuance of like old... Were DK books something for you?
Big inspiration.
Okay.
That idea of like the kids encyclopedia, but a little bit extra, like that's the energy I want to have for the spreads.
and it's been weird because I feel like there's been this period where we just didn't have those. Those were huge in the '90s and the early aughts, and then they just kind of dipped.
I'd say it's the internet. The
Yeah.
function they would have in a space lost potence because they tried to cover all subjects because back then no internet, no active,
Hmm.
easy, regular access meant that it had to cover a lot of different subjects. It's like the first paragraph of every Wikipedia article. Where now you can go to any page and find out all this information. Now I feel there should be a resurgence of it because it should be curating information that is
Yes.
otherwise hard to find. We do find not necessarily GK, but those style of books with women in science, women in STEM.
Hmm.
I see a lot of those in the picture book section of kids' bookshops.
Sure.
And they're very successful because they're highlighting important information. Also, like people of color in STEM and artists and all sorts of other things as well. That again, it's more about curating this important information.
Yes.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
hopefully, yeah,
No, no, no. I think that's incredibly apt, right? Like and accurate. It's they the need that they fill never went away. We just kind of imagined it did with Wikipedia and
yeah,
the internet,
yeah.
but it's very different kinds of informational access.
Hmm.
It's breadth versus depth, right? A DK book will never be as deep as even a well done Wikipedia article. It can't be, and frankly, it shouldn't be. That would be a bad design decision from the publisher's standpoint. But it can be very, very well curated and broad. And yeah, I'm
It can
very
shine a
excited.
light on the most interesting stuff.
Exactly, right? And that's what it's for, right? And that's why adults love them as much as kids, because we all love the most interesting bits.
Yeah,
That's why trivia games are, if you can stand them at all, they're fantastic, because it's just a game about the most interesting bits of things. Um, cool. It's odd to me that I haven't heard more projects like this emerging, and I'm very excited to see anything like it. Let alone one, I think, by somebody who has such an eye on accessibility to the information and kind of permission to engage in these things, as a central tenet.
yeah. I never want to say absolute statements because nothing is ever original. But this is the first project I've heard of, and it is a little bit of boasting because I'm the one running it. But I think it's the first time that people have been really combining academics and role playing games in a way that's not just in that sort of erudite form of role play where it's like, oh, we're going to explore human connection and sort of like all these cool ideas, but that's very high level. I think this is the first time where it's like, here's all of the research for the world. It's not like Ed Green invented some random fantasy racism
Sure.
orcs. Like it's we're exploring real cultures with real people, and here are all the links, and here's all the graveyards, and we don't know what this means. Why don't you explore that in the game and try and discuss what it could mean? And
So
really engaging with it in that way.
I'll say it's not. Um, but
Great. I hope
which
there's
is
more.
which there are. But this is one of the only ones I can think of that's meant for a non-hobbyist population, right? Projects that take historical accuracy as paramount and bring them into role-playing games do exist. Mostly they're awful. They're
Ah, so well, brains and words and links. So
sure.
this is one of the things we want to try and challenge. When I'm saying I'm the first, I'm trying to actively create conversation and challenge what we expect as norms, because I know there are a lot of. I'm not saying I'm the first historical game. That's not what I'm
Sure.
trying to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, there are definitely. I grew up around reenactors. There are definitely
Yeah.
reenactment games. But what I'm trying to do, or what I hope to do, is to take expectations and then use the essentially present all of the information that we have and then say please question it as opposed to take it as law. A lot of the times with
Gotcha.
historical games they can take a really bad view, but because someone published it they go, oh well, that's fact.
Yeah.
And then they perpetuate it, and not only does that cement it as something that is meant to be true, but also it teaches more people this viewpoint and they take that on as something that's serious.
Yeah, it sits, at least
Yeah.
as you've described it to me, at the intersection of, historical world building and role playing games of something like Orbis Mundi or something like that, and the kind of educational, exploratory, non hobbyist role playing product coming out of the educational world like Critical Core from Game to Grow, which is like their spin-off of 5e developed for neurodivergent populations, and like finding a middle ground between those two. And I want to say that is genuinely unique. I'm not sure I've encountered anything like that before, and I think it's a really fertile space to produce educational
Yeah.
and yet fun things.
When I say that nothing's original, I mean like I recognize there are a lot of different products that have paved the way that have let me come to this
Yes.
sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
So I definitely want to recognize that like I'm not out here like ooh.
Yeah, you haven't arrived out of nowhere at a wholly new thing, but you may have
Yeah.
still arrived at a wholly new thing.
Hmm.
It just comes from somewhere, but like that doesn't make it any less new or frankly less exciting. Like, and honestly, I hope it's very well received because I want it to not be a new thing. I want it to be old hat.
Ugh. So I feel like this is the first time it's publicly said, but we've tried. The reason why it took a while is because initially we were trying to find funding for it, and repeatedly we ran into accessibility issues where it's difficult to explain the concept of a role-playing game to people who've never played one before. With all of the examples you can find in applications, it's difficult to, and all the research. I mean, again, I cited maybe 60 papers in one application for funding to develop this resource, and until you've experienced a role-playing game, you just don't get it.
Yeah.
So while we were looking for funding, we were also working on the product. But now that we've got a little bit of like internal funding from the Society of Antiquarians, we're going to be producing a proof of concept, which is also going to be sort of like a teaser of like what things could be like.
Sure.
And then in theory, we're going to be taking this to Kickstarter in September, October, to produce the whole thing.
For that. I'm also excited, and I have no idea if this is going to be allowed based on your funding sources or whatever, but like licensing, right? I think there's an argument to be made that if you develop some kind of baseline framework for creating this sort of thing, other historical societies could
it's open source.
Their own. Awesome. Good. Glad
it's
to hear it.
It's Creative Commons, and it will be released under I can't remember the exact like phrasing of it, but essentially share alike nonprofit.
Okay.
The resource, this is from the very beginning, this is something we wanted it to be, but digitally it's free.
Okay.
The entirety of it, all of the resources will be for free digitally, including accessible versions as we can find and make. And then it's the print run that will be selling. It's not the contents, but it's the fact you can get it as a book that we will be selling that, and then we'll be using funds from that to fund the next iteration of the project and the next one.
Gotcha.
But yeah, it's gonna be. Is it? Creative Commons, not open source. Yeah. But that's the core basis: is that people should be able to take this and do whatever they want with it. Well, hopefully not make terrible propaganda, but like make helpful, good things and discuss history and explore. That's a core ethos of the project.
I like it. I like it a lot. All right, so the final inevitable question I think that I ask everyone is, all right, so here's the arc to today. Here's a summary of what drives you, of what you've done, of how it's all been informed by who you are as an individual. Now, we have no idea what the future looks like. God, it could be a pandemic next round, and we immediately go back into it tomorrow. Like, it could be a utopian future, aliens. I have no fucking idea. But assuming some kind of baseline normalcy and no world-ending disruptions, like what do you think of for like the next year? What's on your plate? What do you hope lands on your plate?
More role-playing game work. I want to keep writing and illustrating and designing. It's the most fulfilling thing I've ever done. It makes me happy. So more of that. I hope Carved in Stone gets funded. The goal, obviously, budget needs to be set out, but I think I'm going to be aiming for £15,000 to pay myself, pay for tools, and then also hire a whole slew of specialty writers and artists to come in and talk about specific subjects. I mean, one of the
do a retailer's pledge.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah.
It'll be going to retail as well. But it's the biggest chunk I've ever going to be. Most amount of money I'm ever going to be trying to get in one time. I've only ever gone for like £2,000 or £3,000 before, but I think a project like this with a large enough audience would definitely fit. I think it's possible.
No, I don't doubt it. I mean, I would like to think £15,000 is going to be nothing when like people realize
It's like
happening.
it could be nothing. It also could be like I raised £2,000 and people are like, cool, but maybe next time, and we find a new way of working around this.
It's true. Yeah.
But I have hope. I have hope that I get to work on Carved in Stone. I get to work on it full time, just for the whole year. I get to run games. I mean, this is one of the things the Society of Antiquarians floated, but they have access to all of these castles and places. They're like, why don't we do a live action like role playing series in castles, and everyone's dressed up, and you're at these different locations, and then we release adventures for those locations with the actual maps of the castles.
Yes.
Stuff like that. Yeah, it's so cool, isn't it?
Do that, please.
I'd love to.
That's okay. Wow. Fuck, I want that life.
Like there are a million cool things I want to do with Carved in Stone, exploring history and just having conversations. I think that's hard. If it wasn't Carved in Stone doesn't fund. I'd still want to make role-playing games that promote conversations and have fun and tell stories. In one form or another, that's what I want to do. Or win the lottery. Either or.
I mean, if you won the lottery, I imagine you would just do the same thing.
Oh, yeah, I'd definitely keep working.
Yeah.
I'd be like, 6 days a week.
Yeah. There are two kind of lottery winners. Ones who just keep doing what they're already doing, and ones who completely upend their entire life, and you definitely seem like you'd be in the first camp.
I'd probably also hire other people.
Sure.
Though
it sounds like you're already doing
I'd have like a creator fund. I'd pay more.
Fair, yeah. No, I have the same dream. I think about that all the time. If I got rich today, yesterday, tomorrow, basically I'd buy a lot of books. Cool. I don't know, maybe I'd buy a house.
And then after I'd have a splurge week. I'd have a splurge week where I order out every day. I'd buy a house. I'd get a new computer. I'd be like, oh my god, all these cool things. And then afterwards, I'd be like, I still have all this money and I'm bored now.
Yeah, I'd just be like, all right, what cool project do I want to do, and which of my friends can hire and pay lots of money to do it.
And that's something I want to make really clear about this project that I'm really excited for. With Carved in Stone, there are a lot of aspects of history and places where voices just aren't given the place to talk or to share their point of view. A cool fact that I think I never knew and would never have been taught in school, but there were, in Scotland and around England, the whole of the UK, after the Roman Empire collapsed, there were still pockets of Roman soldiers all around, and communities. When we think of Rome, we think of white or maybe Italian people,
sure.
But there are a large majority of Africans and like Eastern Europe and beyond, all these different cultures conglomerated together because it was a massive, culture.
Yeah.
And so there's evidence of African like ovens and cooking and culture on the northern tip of Scotland. And when people talk about ancient Scotland, they talk about the Celts and they talk about the Picts, they think brave and they think, white skin and red hair and
yeah.
But in reality, it was a hugely multicultural place. And with the project, I would love to be able to hire all sorts of different diverse writers to come in, take the research, and then make their own sections about what that could mean and what their interpretation of history is in a role-playing sense and how to engage with it. That would be so exciting.
I want that too. I want all of this. I hope you make a lot of money.
Yeah. I mean, I hope that it gets out there and that it makes a difference. That's my goal.
Well, the least I'll do what I can. I mean, I'll retweet it. But I'm rooting for it. All right. Well, yeah, it was a good conversation.
This has been fun.
Yeah. I'm excited. So I'm going to go. I'm going to stitch this together. I'm going to put it up. I'll let you know when it's up.
Perfect.
But thank you. Thanks for this. This was good.
Yeah.
All right. Well.
Ooh, and you can find me.
Yes, the inevitable. Yeah.
You can find me on Twitter at Dungeons on a Dime. Also on Instagram at Dungeons on a Dime. Also on Facebook, but I don't ever check it, at Dungeons on a Dime. And doad.co.uk is my website. That's my store. You can buy my books. They're beautiful. They ship around the world.
DOAD.co.uk.
Yes.
Because I said something midstream on that. Wanted to make sure I had it right for transcription.
Yeah. Just say hi. I love chatting to people. I'm just in my flat.
You're very friendly.
Yeah.
You are.
I hope so.
Yeah. No, you are. Even in text, it comes across. If you don't know where to find me, good.
Do not perceive.
Yeah. There you go. I'm disappearing into the background now. Anyway, this is a good time. Thank you for this. We started this at 10:30 a.m. on a Wednesday. I don't normally do interviews this early, but I feel like this actually gave me energy. So I'm looking forward to my day now.
Go out there and get some cool stuff done.
Yeah, likewise. Finish off your day on a high note. All right. Later.
Goodbye for now.